I'm a hair mineral analysis expert. I have a background in functional medicine, and I educate people using HTMA testing to maximize health, erase debilitating symptoms, and gain energy. I'm a multi-time kettlebell sport world champion, and I'm constantly searching for high-performance pros from all over the world to bring you this human optimization podcast. My name is Lisa Pitel-Killah. Welcome, everybody, to a brand new episode of the Human Optimization Podcast. And I'm so excited to have here with us today R Blank. He is the CEO of Shield Your Body, whose mission is to make technology safer. With hundreds and thousands of customers in over 30 countries and having been interviewed on platforms ranging from ABC television to Electric Sense, R is an internationally followed expert on issues of EMF, health, and safety. He was inspired to create SYB when he co-authored his best-selling book entitled Overpowered with his father, Dr. Martin Blank, one of the world's leading EMF scientists. He has degrees from Columbia University and UCLA and now hosts the new Healthier Tech podcast. Welcome, R. It's so good to have you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's a pleasure to appear here on the Human Optimization Podcast.
You know what? EMFs it's such a topic that's been around for so long, causing us so many issues that people don't even realize. And I'm so excited for our viewers to be able, and our listeners, of course, to be able to learn more about that from an expert like yourself. And so let's talk and start with a little background on you, because everybody, of course, is going to want to know all about you.
Okay, well, where would you like to begin?
You begin wherever you want. We're here to listen.
Well, so I started I had a 20-year career in software engineering, and I had an engineering firm in Los Angeles. I taught software engineering at University of Southern California, and it was about 2012. My father, Dr. Martin Blank, had a contract to write a book about the health effects of EMF and what science had to say. And even though that's only 10 years ago, the landscape for knowledge and awareness around this issue was much different then than it is now.
Of course.
While he was a great writer, his career was spent writing for other smarty pants, just like him, academics and scientists.
Yeah.
And so this book, in contrast to that, was designed for general audiences. And by that point, like I said, I taught at USC, and I had written a book myself, and he asked for some help to write this. And so I sat down with him. We weren't actually together at the time, but over phone and internet, I sat down with him and we wrote the book together. And that was really an eye-opening experience for me. Obviously, my father being who he was, I was aware of this issue my whole life. And I never had a microwave, and I held a cell phone up to my head when I used it. So I had awareness, but I didn't have an understanding. And what that experience taught me, a few things. One is that the science on this topic is actually incredibly strong. When you hear it covered in mass media, you'll often, and they do cover it, but it's often a he said, she said. Some people say it's dangerous. Some people say it's perfectly safe. But when you actually look at the science, there's a massive amount of science showing that these forces are harmful, even at very, very low doses, literally orders of magnitude below what safety standards permit. But then you step back and you think, what are the sources of this stuff? The sources are everything that defines modernity, and not just comfort, but society and economy. It comes from our computers. It comes from our phones. It comes from our appliances. It comes from our cars. It comes from everything that we use and that we define. In order to get rid of this stuff, you'd have to go back to a life that resembled 1850.
Wow.
And so, you can't get rid of it is the upshot, right? You could make it safer. That's for sure. You could make these products emit less of this, but you can't get rid of it. And so I realized there had to be safer ways for people to engage with technology. And that's where the idea for what became Shield Your Body started. So that's the R Blank creation story.
That is, and you're so true. I think there's a lot for people who are listening right now to realize, because we're all excited. Oh my gosh, 5G's here, and it was 4G, and now it's 5G, right? We're all excited because everything gets faster and everything works better, but we're not seeing what that causes for us with
Yeah.
regards to health issues and how it affects us. And so let's talk a little bit about self-care, because, building that relationship with technology, I think, is critical for us to do it safely and for us to do it in a manner that's going to allow us to live long, happy lives. And so share a little bit on that.
Sure. Well, that comes down to, as a first step, in order to, like I say, this stuff comes from everything. It's virtually impossible to live an EMF exposure free lifestyle. There are some people who come very, very close to it, but they have sacrificed a tremendous amount in terms of their careers, their income, their quality of life, their ability to socialize. So when it comes to building a healthier lifestyle for yourself with respect to EMF exposure, there are basically two things that you can do. Mm-hmm. One is to use less of this tech. So there are plenty of, just to participate in modern life, right? You almost certainly need a phone. You probably need a computer. You're probably going to need to live in neighborhoods where other people have Wi-Fi, but you don't need. So one thing that people should really try to contextualize, because I understand this perceptual bias that, well, we've had this EMF stuff for a while. What people really need to realize is how much more there is every year. So one example I walk people through is think of your bedroom now, and think of your bedroom when you were a child, and how many EMF emitting devices, right, are there now that weren't there as a child. Yeah. And, when I was a kid, the only real EMF emitting thing in my room, other than the lights, was an alarm clock and a radio. And that was it. I didn't have any phones. I didn't have a TV. I didn't have a tablet. I didn't have an e-reader. I didn't have a smartwatch. I didn't have, any of these devices that are now commonly found, certainly in your bedroom, but even in children's bedrooms. And that is an illustration of just how much more there is every year. So the first step is to use less of that stuff. Yeah. So, do you really need a smart thermostat? Do you really need a smart door lock? Do you really need a smart refrigerator? Do you really need a smart kitty litter box, which they sell? Do you really need a smart tampon, which is what they sell? Do you really need your watch to be a smartwatch? All of these, and the answer to some of these might be yes, I really do. That gives me enough value in terms of my personal ability to enjoy life. Mm-hmm. But the odds are that the answer to all of them isn't yes, right? Yeah. And so really pick and choose which of these things you want that add value to your life. Mm-hmm. Also, turn them off when you're not using it. That's another way to use less of this stuff. The key example I give there is Wi-Fi. Now, people who really take their EMF mitigation seriously, they get rid of Wi-Fi and they use Ethernet instead. Mm-hmm. But I know just by dealing with consumers every day, that's not something a lot of people are willing to do. And so the smart thing there is to turn it off at night when you're mm-hmm. asleep. You're not getting any value out of that exposure. So just turn it off. So that's the first rule, is to use less of this stuff. The second rule is to create as much distance between this stuff and your body as possible when it is in use. Mm-hmm. The reason that's important is because the power of EMF diminishes exponentially with distance. And so, for instance, if your phone is 1 inch away from your body and you move it 2 inches away from your body, you've cut the power of that exposure by 75%. Wow. And so forth and so on as you continue to double. And so distance is really your friend. So good examples there are never to carry your phone in your pocket or bra. Mm-hmm. Never use your laptop in your lap. Keep the Wi-Fi router as far away from where you and your family spend time as possible. Mm-hmm. So you want to minimize your use of this technology, and you want to maximize the distance between that technology and your body when it is in use. And those are the two key things that everyone can, and I believe should, do It all comes down to really just thinking about your behavior. I use plenty of technology. People I know use plenty of technology, but you can use it in ways that really doesn't impact your ability to enjoy the technology, but is much, much, much safer from an EMF exposure perspective.
Makes total sense. And you're right. I mean, turning it off at night, right? Turning the phones. I mean, you really don't need all of those things on at night. So that makes total sense. And I definitely always have that in my wheelhouse, thinking about that, just to be able to minimize that. And so one question I have, just because with that distance, that's a really great I feel like really easy thing for people to do. Can we talk just about, like, I mean, I've always used earbuds, right?
Mm-hmm.
I went to change over to the wireless and I was like, no, because now they're transmitting. Now it's in my ear. It's close to my brain. Can we touch on that just a little bit? Because I think that's a super important point that I think a lot of people don't even consider.
So I consider myself to be a pragmatist when it comes to, my lifestyle recommendations for people. I don't tell people to abandon tech. I don't tell people to stop using tech. One area where that gets, a little dicier from my perspective is any tech that is designed to be body worn, so-called wearables. Yeah. Now that includes things like Apple Watch and so forth, and we can get to that. But even though people don't often think of it as wearables, that includes AirPods and other Bluetooth headsets. Yeah. And there is no way to use those more safely, right? Because you can't create distance at all. When you have AirPods, it is obviously, as you pointed out, very close to your brain. But not only is it close to your brain, it's close to your brain in a part of your head that doesn't have any natural shielding from bone, right? Because the ear canal, there's a hole in your skull right there. Mm-hmm. And you add to that people tend to use these, for hours at a time. Yeah. So you're getting extended exposures at a very sensitive part of your head. And it's not just your brain, it's also your eyes, which are very vulnerable to this type of damage. Yeah. And there's increasing evidence that there's multiple nerves in your head that impact both vision and listening, hearing from these exposures. So what those devices use is Bluetooth, mm-hmm. and Bluetooth from a frequency perspective is very similar to Wi-Fi, which is also, it's not quite as, but it's very similar to cell phone radiation as well. They're different frequencies, but very similar. They're in the same kind of area of the electromagnetic spectrum. Mm-hmm. Now, Bluetooth generally uses less power than both Wi-Fi and cell phones. So the power of the exposure is less, but again, the area of the exposure and the duration of the exposure make it one of these things where I tell people not to use them. Yeah. Because I don't think there is a safe way to use them. And I don't think the replacements are good enough, right? Like regular headsets, like you're wearing, yeah. They're good enough. You might sacrifice a little convenience on that one, but keep using the wired headsets. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, that's a choice I made just because of some of that research I started digging into. And I actually did buy a pair and then I sent them right back. It was like, I made this decision. I'm like, you know what? I didn't read enough on this and I don't want to put myself in this, in this issue on top of everything else.
There's something else I'd add here, which is, your listeners might be asking, well, where's the science that shows that using AirPods causes cancer? And the answer is that doesn't exist. And the reason that doesn't exist is because these companies are allowed to deploy these products without that kind of testing. They haven't been out and used long enough in order to do the type of research that would show that they increase risks for certain types of cancers, because cancers take years or even decades to form. And so and the reason I highlight that here is because that is how this technology is deployed. They make sure it doesn't burn you. It doesn't emit so much radiation that it burns you. That is essentially the safety standard that is used as it pertains to any of this technology. The data, the science that shows the negative health outcomes, that comes later. That comes years and decades after the actual deployments.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes total sense. Thank you for sharing that. And with regards to, so we talked a little bit about bedrooms, kids' bedrooms and things like that. And I think we have to take into account, the effect, not only with EMF on kids, but on our immune systems, right? And the stress it puts on us. Let's share a little bit about that. And then I want to kind of dive into that reproductive aspect, because I think that's a really interesting key point to be able to speak about as well.
Sure. So the science, immune system is where you'd like to start. Yeah. So the research shows that, and that there have been multiple studies in this area, and they lead to somewhat confounding results, right? Which shows that certain EMF exposures can actually trigger immunosuppression, right? To weaken your immune system's ability to ward off infection and to heal and to recover from damage. Yeah. At the same time, certain exposures in certain people can trigger autoimmune function, which is where your immune system becomes hyperactive and ends up effectively attacking your own body. So the science is pretty clear that it impacts the immune system. The way in which that damage can manifest can vary, and neither of those outcomes are good, right? People might think, oh, well, I have a hyperimmune system. That means I'm invincible. No, that means your body's actually going to end up attacking itself.
Right.
But those are the studies directly into immune function.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of science showing the impact on sleep through one of the mechanisms, the better understood mechanisms at this point, is through melatonin production. So EMF exposure inhibits melatonin production, which is the body's hormone that helps regulate the circadian rhythms. That negatively impacts sleep. The reason I mention that here in answer to this question is because less and worse sleep also weakens your immune system.
100%.
And and so there's multiple mechanisms or vectors through which the impact on your immune health can manifest through these multiple types of EMF exposure that you encounter just during your day.
Yeah. And so think about that. I mean, just for our listeners, think about that with children. Right now, our children's bodies are being kind of, I don't want to say attacked, that's not quite right word, but you understand my comprehension of that, at an earlier and younger age with all of this, right? So, in the future, how many more immunosuppressed kids or how many more kids with autoimmune diseases are going to be stemmed from these types of constant exposures because they just can't handle the exposure anymore, on top of everything else, right? Our envirotoxins and everything else that we're exposed to every day in the environment.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so let's touch a little bit, because reproduction, that was a really interesting one. When I read that, I was like, oh, I want to hear more about this, because obviously there's many things that will affect this, right? In order for us to, as humans, to reproduce. So tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, the science here is incredibly strong, particularly as it pertains to men and to sperm.
Yeah.
And you can actually see, because the body regenerates sperm approximately every 24 hours, right? So you can actually see the impacts. So men who carry their phones in their pockets are much more likely to have infertility and subfertility. For those that are subfertile, what's interesting is if they stop carrying their phone in their pocket, and again, because the sperm regenerates every 24 hours, if you stop carrying your phone in your pocket, your sperm health improves within a day. I mean, it's really that significant. But it's not just phones and pockets, right? It's also laptops and laps. It's all of these behaviors that bring the tech closer to your body, and particularly closer to the gonads that have these impacts. But it's not just, so it's with men. That research is with men, and that is very strong research, but there are also impacts on female reproductive health. And right. The reason I was going to say is, men, the gonads are on the outside of the body, and with females, the gonads are on the inside of the body, right? So the eggs have significant amount more natural shielding just through your body, because the radiation would have to, but so it's not quite as vulnerable as it is with sperm. At the same time, men get to regenerate their sperm every day. eggs, you only got the ones you were born with, right?
Right.
Those don't regenerate. So while they are more resilient against this type of damage, the damage cannot be recovered.
Right.
And so what you see with women, I haven't seen much, and that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means I haven't seen it in terms of fertility. But in terms of reproductive health, there is some very strong science showing that exposure to different types of EMF increases the rates of birth defects, increases the rates of miscarriage. And these birth defects can manifest later in life. So for instance, there's one study that sticks strongly in my head because people find it kind of shocking, but women who had higher EMF exposure when their child was in utero, by the age of 13, that child had a much higher likelihood of having asthma. Wow. And that was a study out of Kaiser Permanente. And so the impacts, I mean, as I'm going through this little exploration with you, right, we keep touching on all these different things, right? There's cancer, there's fertility, there's immune system, there's melatonin, there's miscarriage.
Yeah.
And listeners might get the feeling like, wow, how could this attack everything? How could this manifest as negative health outcomes on so many different systems? And the answer is, we essentially, what the science shows is that you see negative health consequences in basically every system that is measured. And there's a few reasons for that. One is that there's very strong evidence that EMF exposure harms and attacks and harms your DNA. And it can lead to single strand breaks where one strand of DNA breaks, which can lead to mutations. It can lead to double strand breaks, which kills the cell. And DNA is shared by every cell in our body, right? And every single cell has this. Another reason is that the body actually uses EMF to communicate with itself, to regulate itself. That's how the brain sends signals to every part of your body. It's how every part of your body sends signals to the brain. When you start polluting that communication, right, there's plenty of opportunity for things to go a bit haywire. Yeah. And it's not just in humans. Again, you see this in essentially every system that's measured throughout the whole natural world. So you see these same or similar outcomes in birds, in bees, in plants, in trees. Everything that is measured essentially shows negative outcomes from this type of exposure.
Wow. And that just makes me think about my little dog, right?
Yeah.
We all are pets. Like, what are we doing, right? Oh my gosh, what are we doing to our pets? And you know, an interesting point, and I keep thinking about this. The second time you mentioned it, I was like, oh, I have to remember to say that, is laptops in your lap. Tell me how many people that have been working from home, right, the last 2 years have been sitting on the couch, you know, with their laptop working away because they don't have a proper desk space in their home. I think about that and go, oh my gosh, that's such a relevant point.
Well, the fact that they call them laptops.
Exactly.
And you know, this is I think also nicely illustrative for your listeners, right? Some companies have stopped calling them laptops, right? Apple doesn't sell a laptop. Apple sells MacBooks.
Oh, yes.
Dell sells laptops. They call them laptops. And if you actually open the manual, it says you need a separation of 8 inches between the laptop and your body in order to not exceed regulations. And you know, they're selling it, they're calling it a laptop, but if you look at the manual, it says 8 inches. That, you know, you can't levitate a laptop 8 inches above your lap. That's not how they work. Exactly. And the manuals for a lot of these products have little hidden gems just like that. I mean, the iPhone, you're not supposed to hold that right up against your body if you, according to the manual, right? But people don't read this stuff. And then, you know, the products are designed to be used in the way they're telling you not to use them, but they tell you very quietly using fine print.
Right, right. And the one that I'm curious about, and then I want to get into some safety regulations, because I think that's an important thing that people need to understand and know about too, is with phones. So, I mean, I don't hold my phone to my head, but I do use my earbuds, right, in my phone. And is that considered to be that distancing, even though these are attached to my phone? Okay. I was curious about that. I'm like, I never know, you know, if that's something that I should worry about or not?
Well, yeah, I mean, I tell people not to worry anyway. I know a lot of the stuff I say is kind of worrisome, but I also tell people not to worry because, you know, you're going through this life. There's only so much you can control. You can't freak out about everything.
Yeah.
That said, in response to your question, if you're holding the phone further away from you while you're using your wired headset, that is so much safer. But there is some of the radiation from your phone is conducted along the wire, right, from the phone to your ear canal. Now, yeah. I just want to reiterate to people, it is a fraction of what you would get as opposed to holding the phone up to your head.
Yeah, exactly.
But that is why companies like mine, we make and sell air tube headsets, which are these anti-radiation headsets where the final part of the headset that goes up to your ear doesn't actually have wire in it.
It's actually a tube.
Yes.
It's genius.
So it is possible. If that is an exposure that is concerning to you, there are solutions for that, and we make them.
Amazing. And so let's talk about some of those tech safety regulations that aren't designed to protect us. You kind of mentioned, you know, the small print that, and I mean, really, I mean, we're not going to, who reads a manual? Even when I'm building something, I'm like, yeah, if I need it all, I'll pull it out after if I can't get it to put together, right? It's kind of something you set off to the side. Yeah, let's talk about that because I think that's a very valid point.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, the big one that we can talk about that impacts everybody is cell phone radiation regulations. So, and this is honestly, this is such a rich topic. We could spend an hour just covering it, which I won't do. But so let me try to pull out some greatest hits for you.
Yeah, sounds good.
So first, the regulations are based, and I alluded to this earlier, that phones should not give off so much radiation that they actually burn you, right? So what people should understand is some context for this, right? Microwave ovens use EMF. They use microwave EMF. And the reason I bring that up now is because that shows very clearly to people that enough EMF can cook, right? That means it can heat tissue. So enough EMF, that is EMF with enough power, that can actually heat your tissue. It can burn you. It can literally cook food. So all of these regulations are designed so that there's not enough EMF coming out of the phone that it actually burns you. But that is, so it's immediate damage.
Yeah.
None of these regulations that exist are designed to protect against long-term damage or even medium-term damage, which is the type of health effect that we're talking about in this discussion. So that's one. The level itself is just far too high to protect against the types of health outcomes that we're talking about here. Two, people think, right, because the FCC in the United States, the FCC regulates. They're the ones who determine this level, and they quote unquote regulate cell phone radiation emissions. People think or assume that means the FCC or the US government is actually testing these devices. That is not true. What happens is these companies that make the device, they contract the test at labs. So they contract the tests themselves, and they report the data that they're getting from that.
Yeah.
Which you can see, right? I mean, so in fact, there's examples in, I believe it was Chicago Tribune a year or two ago, tested the iPhone and found they hired their own lab to test the iPhone, and they found that the levels were much higher than what Apple was reporting.
Wow.
In France, it's a very similar situation, right? Except there, the French government contracted a round of testing on hundreds, I think it was something over 300 different types of cell phones. And it was something along the lines of 90% of the ones that they tested emitted more radiation than they said. Several emitted more than were legally permissible and had to be recalled from the market.
Wow.
And so you see that companies are incentivized to self-report in ways that maybe don't accurately reflect real life usage.
Right.
And that's another thing, a characteristic of these tests is that since the companies are contracting these tests, they can determine exactly how it is held, right? So And that's how you could get Apple putting in their fine print that you need a minimum degree of separation between the phone and your head, even though that's not how people are going to use it in real life. So then we get to what I would say is a pretty big factor here in these regulations, which is they're based on something called SAR, which is specific absorption rate, which means how much of this they don't actually measure how much radiation a phone emits. They measure how much of that radiation is absorbed by your body, except they don't actually measure how much radiation is absorbed by your body. They use a dummy that's called SAM. And he is designed to emulate a man who is 6'2", 220 pounds, right? Which is bigger than 95% of the world's population.
Yeah.
If you are smaller than Sam, you will be absorbing more radiation than is absorbed in that test. And children are obviously significantly smaller than Sam and are going to absorb significantly more of this radiation than was done in those tests. And that is, and I'll just give you one more. I think I said that was the last one, but I want to give this one more.
That was super interesting.
These safety regulations, right? I said they're designed to prevent exposures that lead to burns effectively, and they aren't designed to protect against long-term damage. There's another characteristic of the way that these regulations are designed just from the ground up. Let's say everything else I just said wasn't a problem, that the level is good enough, right? They are actually protecting us, and the results are being monitored, and an independent person or authority is doing the test, right? Let's just pretend those weren't problems. So there's another really big problem, and that is these regulations are just talking about one device at one moment in time, right? So so the amount of radiation that a phone emits, right, is a single phone that emits, that's technically regulated. But how often are we exposed to EMF just from one phone? That doesn't exist, right? We are exposed to EMF from multiple sources at the same time. So these regulations never consider multiple concurrent exposures, right? So if we're being exposed to the maximum legally from a single phone, what does it mean when there's a second phone nearby, or a third phone, or 3 phones and 5 Wi-Fi networks? None of that is regulated. And then finally, related to that last point, none of them consider cumulative exposure over time, right? So according to the way the regulations are construed, holding a phone up to your head once for 2 minutes should be subject to the same regulation as using a phone against your head for 2 hours a day for 20 years, right? There's no accounting for how much people actually use this stuff in real life. And so again, there's more, and I won't continue to bore you and your listeners with it, but that should give you an example of just how flawed these regulations are. They are not designed to protect you except for from burns, immediate term burns. That's really what they're good for.
Wow, that is incredible. And you're so right. That the last point where we are, even sitting in your living room, right? We could have a laptop there open. We could have a tablet. Maybe we have an iPad mini or something. And then we've got 3 cell phones. We've got the Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
It's like,
and a cell tower out your window and 5 more within a mile, right?
Exactly.
And all of this at once.
Yeah. And so going back just to kind of, again, just wrap our heads around this, is when you said our body uses EMF to communicate. Now that communication is like a grandeur 10-lane highway, but there's only 2 lanes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's going to be accidents. There's going to be chaos. And I think that's a very valid thing to think about when you're just thinking about in a room, what else is in there with you and what's your body having to deal with at that point in time. Very valid. It's so interesting. And so let's dive into, as we finish up, let's dive into some of those small, easy ways that everybody can live healthier and with less exposure based on your recommendations. What does that look like for people?
Sure. So I already gave a couple. I'll reiterate them. Turn off your Wi-Fi at night. Never carry your phone in your pocket or your bra. Or if you do, make use of airplane mode.
Yeah.
Which is essentially eliminates all the EMF emissions from your device. Never hold a phone up against your head. Always use a speakerphone or a headset. Never sleep with your phone. Again, put it into airplane mode or keep it in a different room. Keep the Wi-Fi router as far away from you as possible, and your family when it's in use. Never use your laptops in your lap. These are all examples of either, right, I said minimize use and maximize distance. And I'll also say, well, never use Bluetooth headsets, and really give it a second thought whether you really want that Apple Watch or not, because these are all body worn. There's very few options for actually using them more safely. Now, my company, Shield Your Body, and we do two things. One is education, which is the stuff I'm saying
Amazing.
here.
Yeah.
And then the other is EMF protection products. And what I always tell people to start with the free things, the stuff that, like I just was sharing with you, because those, A, they're free, which is great.
It's always
B,
nice.
Yeah. But B, they eliminate or reduce the exposures in the first place.
Yeah.
And that means there's less that you have to worry about protecting against. But let's use the phone and pocket example, because that to me is a really important use case. I personally believe that is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, single source of exposure that a tremendous number of people have. Because when it's in your pocket or your bra, remember the distance thing. When it's right in your pocket or bra, it's directly up against your body. You're getting a full dose of exposure, as powerful as that device can give, and generally for extended periods of time. So that's one that I want to prevent. But there are some people, particularly males, right? Because oftentimes men don't carry around, purses or pocketbooks where are you going to hold your phone? Yeah. So again, I would say put it into airplane mode, but when you're putting it into airplane mode, you can't receive call. So there are some people for whom, they know they should stop doing that, but they can't, at least not as much as they would like. And so that's where products like my phone pouch come in, or the boxer shorts. So the phone pouch, you put your phone in the pouch. The back of the pouch has radiation shielding. The front doesn't. So it deflects the radiation away from your body while still allowing your phone to work.
Perfect.
So that's an example of where EMF protection products come in, even as the best things that people can do are these free, healthier living tips, right? These free tips to reduce your exposure. Those are the best. And then the second line of defense is EMF protection products. Yeah. And when you're looking for EMF protection products, if you just went out and Googled that, you would find a pretty wide array of options, right? And some have no actual proof that they work. And that's, I consider that to be unfortunate that this type of marketing is happening. All of my products at Shield Your Body, they're based on, I've mentioned this word a couple of times, shielding. They're based on EMF shielding technology, which is universally accepted. It was invented almost 200 years ago by a scientist named Michael Faraday, who created the Faraday cage. And what he showed is that if you weave certain conductive metals into patterns, you can block and deflect EMF radiation in the opposite direction. And so it's been about 200 years, technology has advanced, so you can actually get those metallic fibers very, very small, so they can be woven into, like I say, a phone pouch or boxer shorts or a baseball cap. And that's how all of my products work. And we have lab testing, and we show people how they can verify my product claims for themselves with consumer grade EMF meters.
That's amazing. And so important. You're right. Because, you want to sell a product that works, one that you believe in, and one that's research driven. And that's important to me as well, because again, you know what, it doesn't matter. I feel like what industry we're in, there's always things that are being done just for marketing purposes, right? They're not a proven product. So that's great that you have all that on there available. And so everybody, don't forget that we have a book here, Overpowered, right? A great book, great read, available everywhere. And of course, ours website, you can check out everything that we've talked about today. with regards to visiting shieldyourbody.com. And yeah, I mean, I hope you enjoyed this episode, because I really think that with 5G, and who knows what's coming next, right? Who knows what's coming next and what else we're going to be dealing with. And I think that you have provided those health tips that you talked about that you can do right now today. I think they're very valid. I think they're very easy. It just takes the awareness to be able to implement them.
Yeah, thank you. And if people go to my website, like you said, shieldyourbody.com, that's all one word, shieldyourbody.com. Right there at the top of the homepage is people can download an ebook with the 5, to reiterate the 5 most important tips that I have for people, and explain why I believe those are the most important. And to provide some other critical information about understanding EMF. Like you said earlier, you alluded to, right, there are just so many toxins in the environment, increasingly in our modern world. And, modern life has brought a ton of benefits, but it's also brought these exposures. So with all of these toxins in the world, right, why do I care about EMF, and why should people care about EMF? Well, let's just use an example. Antibiotics in the poultry supply, right? You can't stop antibiotics in the poultry supply. The more people who are aware of it, the more pressure can be applied. You can drive some business to, healthier suppliers, and over time have same with like lead in water. You can't stop lead in water. Again, over time, you can make some differences, and you can try to drive market pressure and make changes in the long term, but you can't get rid of all the lead in the water tomorrow. With EMF, you actually have a tremendous amount of control over your exposures. Sure, you can't actually, do anything about that cell tower that went up, last year, or the 5 of them that you can see maybe from your balcony. But you are in control of your cell phone and where that is. And you are in control of your Wi-Fi and how much that's used. And you are in control of whether or not you upgrade to a smart fridge from your, dumb fridge. And there are all these decisions that you can make in your life that can have an immediate impact on your exposures. And when people do this stuff, I mean, yes, you're improving your long-term health, but people recognize improvements within days, and improvements in terms of their sleep quality, their energy levels, their levels of anxiety. And these are things you don't need to buy anything in order to get. You don't need to invest any money in order to start realizing these benefits.
Yeah. And, I want to sign off with this, because I think this is something that people may or may not know. So I always plug my phone in at night. I always have it on airplane mode. And I remember having a conversation with my husband at one point, and I'm like, can you please either put your phone downstairs or turn it in airplane mode? Well, if I turn on airplane mode, my alarm won't go off. I'm like, yes, it will, because every single night I put my phone on airplane mode, and guess what, everybody, the alarm still goes off in the morning.
Yeah. No, there's a lot you can do with your phone in airplane mode. Same with the Apple Watch.
Yeah. Tons. So, and so with regards to, let's say, people weigh the pros and cons, and they want to have their Apple Watch, that's fine. Is there a way to put that on airplane mode or a sleep mode when you're sleeping? Yes. Okay.
Yes. Apple Watch has an airplane mode. And a lot of the functions will still work. That is actually one of the wearables for which I do make protection. There's no way to protect against AirPods, but it is possible to protect against Apple Watch and other smartwatches. And it's called my wristband. It's the SYB wristband. It's one of my newer products. And you just put the wristband on your wrist, and then you put your watch over the wristband.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm glad we talked about that, because I think that's something. I mean, I don't have one, obviously, because now I'm asking if it has airplane mode. We all know that I don't, but I think a lot of people do. And I think that that's a really relevant point, and something really interesting for them to be able to minimize that exposure to.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you for spending time with us today from your beautiful sunny destination. I love it.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure to chat with you, and to be able to chat with your audience.
Absolutely. And so if you're watching on YouTube today, make sure you subscribe to my channel. We have a brand new episode every 2 weeks. Give this episode a thumbs up. And if you're listening on your favorite podcast host, make sure you give this episode a like, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to today's show. Head over to Pitel-Killah.com to gain access to some amazing free resources that will help you gain energy, erase debilitating symptoms, and be the best version of you. Remember to give this podcast a like and follow me on social media at Lisa Pitel-Killah. I'm here every 2 weeks with a brand new episode of the Human Optimization Podcast. Until next time.